Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. And I'm having major lag issues. Hold on a second here. Sorry. We'll just turn the camera off for a second and turn it back on, and hopefully it'll catch up. That's better. Not perfect. I don't know. Probably gotta restart the computer, but it's too late for that. All right. So Psalm 36. We last time we just covered a couple parts of it, just a little bit, because I don't know, we got some hefty similes and metaphors about God's, some of his intrinsic qualities, such as his mercy, his faithfulness, his righteousness, his judgments. And it's interesting. We have mercy, faithfulness, righteousness, and judgment. Judgment and mercy are kind of at the opposite ends of the spectrum, obviously, because judgment is, mercy rejoices against judgment, as it says. Because judgment implies, things can turn out good in a judgment. You can have the case go your way. But if you're talking about sin in your life and you're just going to be judged fairly, you're going to be found at fault. That's just how it is. You're going to be found at fault. And there's no way we will not enter into condemnation on our own merits. On our own merits, standing before God's judgment, we would enter into condemnation. Except we don't, because of God's mercy. And that's how critical mercy is, because without it, we have no hope. It is what we will, what we depend on for salvation. Faithfulness, we talk about it. Faithfulness to the clouds. God is faithful. Faithful to his word, faithful to, and that about sums it up really honestly. If you say faithful to his word, then that gives us virtually everything I can think of that he would need to be faithful to, meaning because he's faithful to us because of his promises to us. You know what I mean? In fact, faithfulness to the words of your mouth is part of what it means to be true. A lot of times we say things we want to be true or we want to be right, but then are not able to fulfill them. But God's word, which he speaks out of his mouth, he is able to fulfill. And he is faithful to fulfill it. Of course, God's righteousness is like the great mountains. I'm still hung up on those verses. I remember when we got done, I thought I wasn't finished yet. But, you could just brush them off as being sort of meaningless metaphors, I guess. I don't know. I don't think so. I always say, I always try to identify what the person writing was thinking when they say something like this, because this is the observation of the psalmist. That God's righteousness is like this vast and immovable thing that would be described as the great mountains. He doesn't just say like a mountain or like a particular mountain, it's like Mount Zion or something like that, It says actually the great mountains, and I imagine we're talking about not just like mini, because there are a lot of things called mountains that are not very interesting. Like, they're not as high and severe. You know what I mean? Like you see, like the Appalachian Mountains, many of them are not as like rocky and high and stuff. And some of the what do we call it? The physical features of the earth that are described as mountains in the Bible are actually, not very mountainous. Like the Mount of Olives is a good example. If you ever see it, it's not that huge, not like you would think of like Mount Everest, or Mount McKinley or one of the, big mountains like that. But I think about God's righteousness in terms of vast, immovable ranges of mountains. Like something, yeah, I mean, like, when I think about it, like, you cannot pass, you cannot go over, you cannot penetrate, you cannot damage or dent. So verse 7 is where we're picking up. Thou preservest man and beast. And the judgment's the great deep. We talked about the great deep. There's always a great depth to be explored in God's word and also in the judgment of God, because part of the thing we try to do is, and I say this over and over, is use good judgment. Actually, I think the song I used last time was from a little earlier in Psalm 119, teach me good judgment and knowledge. Teach me good judgment. People often point out that Jesus said, judge not, that you be not judged, etc., but they will forget that in John 7, verse 25, is it? Whatever. I do think it's John 7:25. He says, judge not after the outward appearance, but judge righteous judgment. There's a righteous judgment to be made. And a lot of times it's not necessarily passing judgment on someone else or condemnation, but it's using judgment in a particular state. There's the idea of the judicial judgment or prosecution of someone who has violated the law. But there's also the judgment that goes into the law itself. Meaning the law itself is a form of judgment. Like when it says there's a criminal penalty for some particular offense, that is a judgment. It's like the law is already passing a judgment that says that whoever the man is that does this thing shall receive this punishment. That's a judgment already. Aside from someone who is, from the actual act of, did that person commit this thing? Also, remember, in ancient law, when they would bring a matter, like, say, before the king, there was the law, but also went into the king's judgment very much so. And this happens in law today, the specifics of the case itself. And this often happens, too. They have a law that says the man that does this shall pay this particular penalty. And the man standing before the judge, though, there may be extenuating circumstances and stuff that they will take into account when judging the man. So there is the individual case judgment, but there's also like the broad macro case judgment that says in the world, among men, what happens to people who violate this moral or societal norm. And then it prescribes the penalties. So, so that same judgment we need to exercise in our lives, as Jesus said, we do need to have good judgment, to use good judgment. And sometimes it's, despite all that God has given in terms of judgment, there is no specific word sometimes concerning certain things. It's like when people talked about how the internet, the American law was not really ready for the internet, so they had to pass laws trying to regulate it because no previous laws really were applicable because it's a new situation. You can kind of take old laws and try to apply them, but, in legal terms, sometimes I think if there isn't a specific law, you might have no ground to stand on because it's an entirely new venue. I need judgment so I can judge for myself sometimes what's right and wrong. Because sometimes there's no record previously. There isn't someone who went before me and discovered that moment specifically enough that I would know. A lot of human interactions require good judgment because there's an infinite number of unique circumstances that make up every interaction and that distract us from sometimes understanding what the right path is. And so we have to have sometimes focus in terms of being focused on God, that when we are confronted with a difficult judgment, we can turn to Him and have the Spirit guide us, that our judgment be acceptable in the sight of God. How excellent is thy loving kindness, verse 7, O God. Therefore the children of men put their trust under the shadow of thy wings. So there's another metaphor, the idea that God has these wings under which we could shadow. Obviously, the metaphor points to like the idea of there's this time in the ministry of Jesus where he says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and slayest them which are sent to thee. How often would I have gathered thy children as a hen gathers under her wings, but ye would not. The birds often use their wings as coverings to protect their little ones. If you've ever seen a bird with all the little ones under their wings, they're kind of huddled there under the wings of the full-grown one because they don't have the proper feathers and stuff to protect themselves from the elements. So sometimes when it's raining or wind blowing, the bigger bird will hunker down over their little ones and protect them. And obviously, they have no choice but to trust the big bird, their parent, in that situation, because they're utterly dependent on them. But, and God, it's the same thing. We have to trust God to remain under the shadow of His wings. There's a lot of scriptures like in Isaiah 55 where, God over and over again, and I was saying Isaiah 55, but really, do I need to list any to tell you that there are a lot of scriptures where God says, come to me. Come to me. Come to me and your soul shall live. Come, eat and drink, buy. Buy bread and honey without price. So, and Jesus, of course, in His call, come follow me, to His disciples, to His apostles. God calls us to come to Him and under the shadow of His wing. And it implies reliance and trust. And we connect it to the loving kindness of God, that He's willing to protect us, to keep us under the shadow of His wing. But for us, it is somewhat, men do trust God. Like men put their trust in God because God's loving kindness is excellent. I can't actually use that word because that's like too, I don't know. I just want to know. It's probably going to be something like exceeding or excels. But the reason is because it feels too much like awesome. Like a word that's had its meaning sucked from it. Awesome, excellent. Wrong thing. Right? I just want to look at. There we go. How excellent. Precious, rare, splendid. So we had this idea of excellence. This is the idea of preciousness, rarity, splendid, weighty. Precious, rare, splendid, weighty. From the idea of what? From yaka, valuable. Objectively or subjectively. So a wide variety of, it has value. It can mean these different things. How is it translated? It doesn't say it's translated. Oh, whatever. I'm not going to go down the rat hole because it's not necessary. Oops, wrong place. Okay, so right back we go. God does not have any obligation to us, but has in his grace and mercy reached out to us, sent his son to us, sent his word to us, that we might put our faith in him and that we might come under the shadow of his wings, meaning under his protection, under his salvation. It is a metaphor for salvation, the idea that God has things covering you to protect you from the outside forces which otherwise might carry you away in life and destroy you. Every year, it's it's kind of a joke, but it's not a laughing joke, but it's like we kind of talk about how in the spring around here, it's like, finding dead baby birds is just a normal course of life. Between storms and just stuff, they just pop up dead, and probably sometimes the dogs, and it's like, but some of them, it's just like you can tell, it's just they just didn't make it. Or after a storm, you'll find a number of them, around from here and there, and there are things in the world that can destroy us, spiritually and also literally. And God is our protection. His loving kindness is what we put our trust in. That it says he loves us. We take that for granted. It's an astonishing thing to take for granted, but on the other hand, you think about how blessed the world is in terms of that, in spite of the danger inherent in living in the world is also an incredibly, by comparison to all possibilities, it's an incredibly safe place, a place fit for human habitation, a place where men can make a life. And so God is good at, even before we trust in him, he's already protecting us as a species. And God's kindness towards us is in such a way as that he provides our protection. It's a number of times, where it says, if the wrath of God were to be executed immediately, he would destroy us all, because we'd all be found guilty. I mean, if it came to that. But because he loves us, and because he's loved man, and because of his promise to Abraham, and his promise even to Noah, as far as destroying the world with the water again, God does not. He does not immediately execute judgment. And so sometimes that causes people to, think that, that there is no God, or that the nature of God is not such as we know it to be. They would think the nature of God maybe as he's, what's the word I want? Not insensitive, but, insensitive might be the word, but more in terms of dull towards, that he is sort of oblivious and not interested in the affairs of men. Sometimes that's suggested, whether people could, because some people, I remember learning growing up, they said that the founding fathers, many of them were deistic in their outlook on God. I mean, they looked at a God who did not have any active interest. They looked on God as one who had not an active interest in the affairs of men, as one who did not interfere in the affairs of men. It was called the great watchmaker thesis. The idea that God was like this watchmaker. He made the mechanism and then just set it going and then watched what happened. And I understand the attractiveness of that, because it is it's not entirely untrue that God is like that as far as he makes mechanisms. The plan and purposes of God are all laid out beforehand. So I honestly don't think they require like actual tinkering later on. But the thing, God's intervention in the world is not representing him tinkering with his plan, like trying to adjust it back to true or anything like that. It's all got to be part of it. You know what I mean? By adjusting it back to true, like as if it was going astray. Like he had a plan, it was kind of, we're kind of going off the road a little bit here, so he has to jump in and kind of steer the car back on the road, meaning the car being human history, the life of all things or whatever. He's got to get it back on track, so he's got to go in and work a miracle and bring everything back to the way it's supposed to be going. I don't believe that anything that God does in the affairs of men is part of the plan. It is not a part of a maintenance or something like that. Otherwise the plan might not come to fruition. It might fall apart. I don't believe like that, and I don't think that's correct. So there is some, that watchmaker hypothesis of the deists. There's an attractiveness to it because there is a certain truth to it. But it also renders God a bit impersonal, which of course, I do think that while God is not intervening in the world to help his plan get back to where it should be, in his ordained plan, he does interact with us. He does, through prayer, signal to us or put into our hearts or even outright speak. On rare occasions, people have heard from God, right? On rare occasions, God has shown them power or chastised them personally, like the Apostle Paul. And there are different ways God interacts with us to make, to bring that about and to further our experience of his plan for us according to his original determination. But it's part of the process. So they trust in the shadow of thy wings. They shall be abundantly satisfied with the fatness of thy house, and thou shalt make them drink the river of thy pleasures. To drink of the river of thy pleasures. For with thee is the fountain of life. In thy light shall we see light. Interesting phrases and stuff. There's a lot of interesting phrases in this psalm, don't you think? In thy light shall we see light. You know what I mean? There's obviously like the double light there means something, doesn't it? So let's first look at they shall be abundantly satisfied with the fatness of the house. That putting your trust in God, in the excellence of his loving kindness, results in satisfaction. And in God's house, there is fatness. God has a supply. A supply. The fatness indicates it is like we say rich. The word, we often describe a pastry as being very rich when it is loaded with fats and butter or whatever. It's like, it's very rich. You can taste it because it's filled with, it's a fat with flavor and tastiness. And so also, so as a metaphor, also the idea of fatness of the house means that the house is well supplied, well appointed with good things, with things that are pleasurable. Like it says, thou shalt make them drink of the river of thy pleasures. And that's one of the things is that, we don't often talk about it. Well, I guess I do from time to time, right? I talk about heaven or the kingdom of God, however you want to characterize it. It's fine. People talk about heaven, it's fine. It's the kingdom of heaven. Heaven's influences are never far from us. But, when we talk about eternity with God, naturally the question comes up, or it's natural to come up, I think, what are we going to do? Everyone wonders what's going to be like. What are you going to do? We're sit around and play harps? You know, I could go for a long time just sitting around playing a musical instrument. I enjoy that. But anyways, you know, it's immaterial because the what is not as important as the what shall it be like? You know what I mean? The what you are doing versus what shall that thing you do bring? Because that thing that you shall do shall bring pleasure. And that God, like a flowing river, you know, in the book of Revelation, from the throne of God there comes this river of water of life. And life, you know, Jesus said, I am come that they may have life and that they might have it more abundantly. Because there is life and there is life. There is light and there is light. There is life in that there is just merely the biological fact of life. You know what I mean? There's a biological fact of life exists. There's a bacteria, there's a paramecium, there's an amoeba, and there's a dog, a cat, and a person, and they're all forms of life, and that's life. But the river of life that comes out from God's throne is not merely a river of biological activity. You know what I mean? Water itself is that which sustains life. And in fact, when scientists go looking for life in the universe, they always say, since the 90s, I think it was when I started hearing this, is follow the water. That they realize that the only life forms we know depend on water. So why not look for life forms elsewhere in the galaxy, wherever we can find water? And that's a logically sound proposition. But life is but the water that gives life. Notice that there is life in the water, but the water gives life. And there is something about a river. A river flows. You know, that's the point of a river. It has a trajectory, like a line proceeding. You know what I mean? Like if you take one point in the river, as the water flows, that point in the river where the water is, it moves forward as the water flows downstream. You know what I mean? It is a flowing active thing, like time. Time marches on, it goes forward. The river flows, on and on it goes. Like life, it sort of has this time element with it, because as things happen over time, events happen in time, that is, time is that dimension of reality in which allows events to proceed and to precede one another, to happen before and after, cause and effect. You know, time is essential to all that, because otherwise we would not have any dimension in which to measure cause and effect. Cause and effect happen over time. And so a river carries with it all those senses. And so, you know, and of course there's life, biological life, and then there's life, which is like water. It is the things that are done in life. You know, everyone who's listening to me has had a drink of water. And when you're thirsty, a drink of water can be exceedingly refreshing. It's a very nice experience, you know. It is a pleasure. You ever had the pleasure of a nice, cold, clear, clean glass of pure water? There's pleasure in it, you know, to drink of that living substance which sustains our lives. I often, you look at water sometimes, like really look at it, the silvery reflection of the transparent surface. You know, I mean, there's all this. It's an amazing thing. You know, it's like, I think of all like the drinks, you know, milk and juices and stuff. It's like, but nothing is quite as amazing as just this simple water. And so drinking from the river of God's pleasures is like drinking his special water. You know, I don't take it literally per se, but what I do think is it represents, like it says, that they may have life and they may have it more abundantly. Because there's living and there's living. People say, well, now you're really living it up. Sometimes people get money and they start living it up. They use their money to attain pleasurable things in this world. It's not that pleasure in and of itself is evil. Pleasure is not evil. God gave pleasure. Like I said, when you drink water, is it not pleasurable when you're thirsty? Is it not pleasant to the mouth, to the tongue, to the stomach, to fill yourself up when you're thirsty? And yes, it is. To a thirsty man, there's no greater pleasure than to drink, especially clear, cool, clean water. And God also has pleasures in store for us, but it's not clear always what they are. It's often very given mysteriously. You know what I mean? I can tell a few things. One of the things it says is that we shall know him, even as we are known. That's a big difference from now because, my knowledge of God is extremely limited to what God has revealed to me as a human being in this world. And I certainly could not claim to know God as he knows me. That's quite a, that's quite a leap to go from what I know about God to knowing as much about God as God knows about me. It's funny. It's like, I could buy it as an absolute. You know what I mean? But by that, what I mean is everything there is to know about Paul. You know what I mean? You could fit into maybe a really thick notebook, whatever. It's like, I don't know. That's not meant to be self-deprecating or self-promoting. It's just meant to be just an arbitrary amount. Say some thick notebook represents everything they know about Paul, all his thoughts and feelings, and go into a nice thick volume, and then so that I would know God in terms of I would have a nice thick volume on what I know about God, meaning that would be like an absolute equal amount, as opposed to the way we usually take it is where I know God knows me 100%, so I'll know 100% about God. And that's how we usually take it, and that is how I take it, but it suddenly occurred to me in a kind of a humorous way to think about it in terms of absolute knowledge, meaning the amount I know that is to know about me. I'm not that deep, but God is very deep. But he knows us even more deeply maybe than I realize, there is to know about me, because there are aspects to the human mind and stuff. The way we work right now, a lot of things we don't even know how we got here. I don't know how I became the man I am. I can kind of trace the path and stuff, and I know things that happened to me. But in every circumstance, I can't tap down exactly how everything changed things, how everything affected things. I just know things happened, and I try to understand. I try to understand what brought me to where I am today. But God, so one of the things is we shall know him. The world will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea, as it is written. That's one thing. Now, one of the things people often mistakenly talk about, and I've talked about this many times, and I'm not going to dwell on it, is the whole, the fatness of thy house. Oh, there's going to be a feast. There's going to be, wait till you see the donut pyramid at the house of God, right next to the cheesecake and and just regular cake and all the pies and the pastries and, because that's what they say. Some do apparently. That's what they said on national television when they got a chance to talk about it. Oprah Winfrey. My grandmother years ago brought me this video. She videotaped Oprah Winfrey talking about heaven. I think it was Oprah Winfrey, right? Heaven, and she interviewed different people saying stuff. Some of them were wacky, gurus and stuff that was just like, I'm like, boy, this is pop consumption about, God and heaven and the afterlife and all that stuff. Okay. And she made me watch. I watched it with her. I remember that's where I saw the President Haggard I forgot his first name. I want to say Merle, but of course, Merle Haggard, it's spelled different too. Anyways, I forgot his name, but he was president of the National Association of Evangelicals. And so I figured that's got to be a mainstream opinion. And what was the mainstream opinion that he voiced? It was that heaven, it's like you could go there and eat as many pastries as you want and never get fat. And that represents the pleasures of heaven. In a metaphorical sense, I'll buy that. You know what I mean? Like, I would like to say it's like being able to eat all the pastries you want and never get fat. Like, there's a certain amount of, it's a weird thing because, they say too much of a good thing. You know what I mean? But is that really true? I mean, in the world it's true, right? So many things, are just, a small amount is good. I was talking to someone, about, bread. And, sometimes people are very against bread in the modern, thinking about diet and paleo and all this stuff, right? Well, Jesus himself blessed bread, and I think bread is a fine thing to eat. But just like he also at the same time blessed wine, which is also a fine thing to drink, but in small amounts. And I think the same thing about bread. Bread is like, think about how hard it was to make bread in the olden days. It's like, in my garden, I got tomatoes. It's easy to make tomatoes. You just go out there and pick them. Cucumbers, tomatoes, squash, peppers, fruit, cantaloupe. You just go out and pick the fruit. Bread, you gotta have a field of grain, and then you gotta take all the little, you gotta cut them down. It's a very involved process, and the calories are very dense. And there's hazards with that, but in and of itself, is it bad? No, I don't think so. Some people hate bread, I always get up. I'm always like, okay, people hate bread now. Well, it's like, the people that hate alcohol, because if you drink so much of it, it'll make you sick, it'll run your life, it'll take over everything. And bread can do the same thing as far as, like, it'll make us fat, it'll give us heart disease, it'll do all, you take too much of it. That doesn't mean there isn't room in a healthy diet for those things. I don't want to get off the track too much. But there is too much of a good thing when it comes to things in the world. Like, one of the things, like they talk about carbon emissions, right? Too much carbon, bad. Well, oxygen, too much oxygen, bad too, by the way. Oxygen, oxidization. Why do you think people are always taking antioxidants? Because in the human body, oxygen is essential and also very destructive. The oxidative process, where oxygen molecules bind to things, is it's a form of corrosion, rust, and destruction. And it also has a negative effect in the body. Oxygen does. So it has a positive and a negative. Oxidization is a process that happens in certain circumstances. I'm just saying, the same oxygen that is essential for life is also exceedingly corrosive to metals. And it is also, there are functions in the human body that it also brings about that are, part of that, overall weighing of good, bad. There are things we need. There's vitamins and minerals you need, they're essential. But, like, you wouldn't want to take, 1,000 times the recommended dose of one particular vitamin, because that could be toxic. Things that will not hurt you at small amounts will hurt you at large amounts. Be careful about that. But what about God? God, is God the exception to this? He must be the one exception to the rule that, too much of a good thing is God, because I don't think you can have too much of God. You can't have, the river of his pleasures is something you can drink from forever. And it is not gluttony. It is always satisfying, but never destructive, I think. I don't know. It's interesting. With thee as a fountain of life. Because I would say that, well, there's like the story in Greek mythology of, what are they called? The Sirens. Right? The Sirens would sing this song, and the sailors, as they would sail by the island, would become so like insane from listening to this beautiful song that they would like drop everything and sail directly to the island and smash their ship on the rocks that surrounded it. It was a trap. So we have the idea of siren song as something that lures someone to destruction. It draws them in. And so, is that the right one though? No, it's funny. I said the Sirens, but I'm on the right story. I'm on the Odyssey, right? But I think I mean the Lotus Eaters. The Lotus Eaters was an island where the people would eat the lotus, and then they'd never want to do anything else. They just want to stay on the island eating the lotus forever, right? And that was also a trap because it would just satisfy your craving and make you completely docile. And the reason it's a horror, it's like a trap. It's another one of the trials of Odysseus that he goes through. The different places he goes, the dangers he has to face. Because there's a sense that to live, one has to get out and live. It's not just enough to be alive. You know what I mean? It's not enough to just be alive. You know what I mean? And that's why, Elijah from the cave, he's hiding out in a cave. He's alive. But he's like, they have destroyed thy they have blah 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 and dig down thy altars, and I am left alone. Or they have slain thy prophets and dig down thy altars, and I am left alone. And what shall I do? Just hide in the cave forever? You know what I mean? Like, being alive in the short term could be victory. I just have my life and live to fight another day, right? But being alive just in a state of perpetual stasis, you can't move, you can't change, you can't do anything dynamic, you can't reach forward, you can't grow. That's not really life. We don't, at least not for humans, it's not usually life. Just, vegetatively absorbing things. Life is about interacting, about encountering new things, encountering challenges. That's truly living. It is not about just simply like, okay, man, the lotus flower. I'm going to take the lotus flower. I don't know what I'm doing with the screwdriver. I was going to try to pretend like I don't know if you smoke it or eat it. I think they ate it. They ate the lotus flower. Whatever. We'll just eat lotus all day. We'll just eat pastries all day and never get fat. I don't enjoy the taste of sweet things in my mouth so much that I feel like I want to do that forever. It's like, I get as many of these things as I want and never get fat. Some people in life showed that they'll do that until they die. You know what I mean? Engaging in one activity endlessly until you die is not living. You know what I mean? So, I often wondered, like the Catholics, there's a movie I really enjoy. I haven't seen it in years. I keep saving it because I want to watch it with my wife or with my kids. I mean, I'd watch it. I would watch it twice this week. If they all wanted to watch it. It's The Kingdom of Heaven. And I think at one point, I think that's the movie where they're talking to some knight or something about, for going and defending the Holy Land or whatever the purpose was. I just remember they talked about standing in the perfect contemplation of the divine essence or something like that. It was from, if it wasn't that movie, it was maybe another movie. I got that. I heard that Catholic priest describing heaven as such. Which is not as exciting maybe as the drunken feasting halls of Odin, or the pagan conceptualizations, or whatever other type of construction of idea of what the afterlife might be. But it sounds boring. It sounds boring. I don't think it would be, because I do think, like living, it would not be just I'm looking at God and I'm just staring into a bright light forever. You know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't be like that. I don't know that Catholic conceptualization it hits it on the head. I don't know what living will be like in God's kingdom. I don't know what it will mean to be alive. I mean, I know that it'll mean this. It'll be more than just being the equivalent of biologically alive. Like someone who's in a vegetative state in a hospital, he's biologically alive. He's not really living, but he's biologically alive. I like the difference between those two guys I talk about sometimes who had no arms and no legs. The one guy is living. He's hopping around and swimming in the swimming pool with no arms and no legs, and jumping up and down and going and doing stuff and high-fiving people with his little flipper foot, and typing on the computer like a madman and absolutely killing it. Living. Another guy I saw, he just, someone's doing everything for him. He's like basically a grown-up baby. And, it's interesting because it's like, if I had no arms and no legs, I want somebody to do everything for me. I don't want to struggle and, oh God, it's like, but the struggle is part of what makes life. The idea of a river of pleasures is something like that. That sounds like more than you can handle. It's not just like a little stream or a trickle. When I say stream, I mean like a tiny stream, by the way. Like a stream from a drinking fountain. But the fountain of God's house is always described as like this river. You can cross this river. It's in the book of Ezekiel, he measures the river, and he goes quite deep. Because it is deep, it is wide and broad, and the flow thereof is powerful, the life that comes forth from God. And the life that we live in God, in his kingdom, is also a fulfilling life. It is not just living. I don't know exactly what it will be. I don't have that level of insight to know exactly what it will be. There will be some element, of course, of contemplation of God. Because, and a degree to which it is hard to get away from that, I think. It's hard, once you get near to God like that and have access, I would think it's difficult to tear yourself away, like the Lotus eater. Where you find something so pleasurable that you feel like you want nothing else. But I do think that in that, unlike many things in the world, in God, because he is not some one-dimensional thing like some lotus flower that makes you feel some sort of drug-induced euphoria, or Lotus eaters is a metaphor for all kinds of drugs and things people become dependent on, obviously. So, the drugs can give someone a certain amount of satisfaction. It's the same thing over and over again. And that's why with drugs, when you become addicted and you're using them all the time, it's like you may notice, I remember, I certainly know that, like, when you do too much, life begins to lose its color. Life begins to lose its verve. Life begins, because you only see everything through the same haze. You know what I mean? You only see it through the same, and life is really about finding your way into that hazy place where you lose sensation and you feel the euphoria of whatever drugs it happens to be or thing. Alcohol has a similar effect. It has a similarly euphoric effect in giving rest and relaxation through the depressing effect that it has. So all kinds of things. But when we start to live for that, we lose track of what really living is. God, similarly, I think, has the magnetic attraction of these pleasure-giving substances and activities, like eating or using drugs, because there's a satisfaction with eating, of course, when you feel, like I said, in drinking. But God has a river of pleasures that I think is not, when I talked about it moving in like time, what I'm saying in that is that the reason I said that out the gate is because I had the same thing in mind, that living life in God is really living. It is not a stasis. It is not just a frozen thing where I'm just shoving pastries in my mouth for all eternity. That's a horrific image. That's not a blessed, oh, what heaven, just a big table with a bunch of very thin people gorging on pastries. You know what I mean? Just an infinite buffet. It's like they're not going to hunger no more, neither thirst. I mean, will we even need to drink like physical water? But we will need to drink spiritual water, and that's, of course, also there's a spiritual idea of like that it gives life in the spirit. But to give life in the spirit, like I said, it's not just about the mere fact of living, like the spiritual equivalent of biological life. Like I'm alive, I'm conscious of being existing. Being existing is silly to say. I'm conscious of my existence. I am aware of the passage of time, or maybe not, I don't know. But I am aware of my existence and have not much else except euphoria. That is not, I think, living. That is not the abundant life which God has in store for us in his kingdom. That there is something, it is not just having everything fulfilled, but rather being submerged in a world that fulfills. You know what I mean? Like in a river from which we derive fulfillment. You know what I mean? And a wholesome fulfillment that is, the metaphor is water, not drugs. It is not, the river of thy wine. Is there anything that ever talks like that? By wine and honey. Whatever. Wine is often put as a metaphor for richness, also, because obviously a rich meal. I mean, one of the diseases of the rich is something called gout. Is that right? Is it gout I'm thinking of? But it's basically a byproduct of eating cheese and wine. Or similarly rich foods. People because sometimes there's people who are so wealthy and they don't have, or not, maybe not even wealthy. I mean, because in America we have the same problem even with the unwealthy, but our country is so wealthy and that we are able to, people, many people can afford to buy much more food than that they need to sustain themselves. And sometimes they just choose to buy only those things which they really enjoy, almost just for sheer pleasure. And so, some very wealthy people, because of that, they choose to only eat those things which they find most pleasurable. Or they eat a lot or too much of the thing which they find pleasure, like expensive wine and cheese. I heard that was what the president of South Korea, one of his illnesses, his ailments is gout because of his affection for wine and cheese. They're rich things. Alcohol can fill up your head and make you lose your good judgment, and also impair your judgment. Yeah, that's what, and impair your physical performance and your mental performance. So impair you both physically and mentally is really what I think I was looking for. So we want to really live. Not just live a shell of a life. Not just live a life that exists, but live a life that is meaningful in God. And I think that the idea of a river is supposed to give us confidence of that life being more than just an exercise of biological certainty. Like, here I am now, I exist. That is not life. There is fatness in God's house that abundantly satisfies. But we should not think of it as the way the abundance in the world works. As far as we think about it in terms of like food, we know that too much of a good thing can be bad. But with God, too much of a good thing is not bad. Just like living life, a life well lived. You know what I mean? Like if I live my life well, in peace with my fellow men, in building up of the people close to me, dynamically engaging with each day, to bring forth new things, to work on new things, to be active in the world. I sometimes people talk about like people not want like the long life is undesirable because you get bored with life or something like that. I mean, I can see people getting bored with life if all they do is boring things. But I'm not of that mindset. I really want, that I think that if you maintain your life, your health, your physical health, your strength, and all those things, that I couldn't imagine running out of things to do or to engage with. I couldn't imagine it. And because it is already that I live the life which God has given more abundantly, I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. And Jesus even talked about in this world, his disciples asked him, what about us, when he was talking about people who had given up things to follow him. We've given up all. And he says, you've given up all these things for me. Yes, you will have a reward in the kingdom of God to come. And even now, you will have a reward of those of you who have left houses and brothers and fathers. You will have those things in God's kingdom. And even now in this world, meaning you have a sort of if you had to leave behind a family because of God, you will find a new family even in this world already through the faith. And that he was talking about that in part. The abundant life lived is not just living. Okay. For with thee is the fountain of life. In thy light shall we see light. That's what I'm talking about. With thee is the fountain of life. Not just the pool of life, the puddle of life. You know what I mean? A limited life. It's like, okay, I just sit here and eat Lotus. Okay, I just shoot heroin until I die. Or I'll just shoot. Hey, heaven is like shooting up heroin forever, except you don't get addicted and you don't get sick. Is that what we want? Heaven is like, it's like a fentanyl buzz. And that it might as well, like they say, oh, it's like eating pastries forever without consequences. I don't, like the drugs that people abuse are useful. I've had narcotics. I had surgery. You know what I mean? I didn't think there was anything sinful about it. I didn't want them to cut me without being zonked out, right? If they're going to do that to me, yeah, put me out. And when I come to, give me some of those pills for a couple of days. So whatever, it's like, is it sinful? No, I've been, when you're wounded and stuff, it's like they got medication to kill the pain. It's not the same thing, right? So we know it's like, okay, it's okay then, but we don't want to just stay in that pool all the time. In the river of life, a little narcotics coming by at a moment in time is no sin. It's just part of the spice of life, I guess, or whatever. It's like the interesting things that can happen to us along the way that we're living. You need an operation. You have an accident or something. They got to dope you up. It can get into things where you get hooked on it from the medical. I'm not trying to make light of it because some people do get hooked through their medical experiences with these narcotics. They do become addicted. I didn't find, I had hydrocodone, which is I think the thing that Rush Limbaugh got addicted to. And I hated it when I was taking it during the day. But then actually, when I just stopped taking it during the day, and then I had the bottle for a while, and then I finished it off using it like sleeping pills, because it sure helped me go to bed at night. But I never felt like I wanted to be like that during the day, because it literally made me feel like going to sleep all the time. And certainly, I didn't like that. And I didn't need it to go to sleep. I didn't develop a dependency. And I don't even understand how you get that. I mean, would you just go back to your doctor and say, I need more of that hydrocodone, or I have pain, or I don't know. And it's got to be overprescribed. Who are these doctors that overprescribe? Because I never get anything overprescribed for me as far as I'm concerned. And maybe it's because whenever they ask me how much pain I have, maybe I give it too low a number. I don't know. I'm not looking for that. That's not what I want to make my life out of. I don't want to make my life out of limiting it to this pool of experience of like, I'm in an altered state of well, not even, I'm in a euphoric state from heroin. I'm just, that's a pool of life, not a river. A river moves from experience to experience. It doesn't get hung up on a single experience. You just go over and over and over again. That yummy taste in my mouth. That wonderful feeling in my veins. I've never shot anything up. I don't know if it feels good in your veins, okay? Maybe it does. Abundantly satisfied. In thy light shall we see light. Do you see what I'm saying about that? Like, that there is life and there is life, right? And there is light and there is light. That what is illuminating has to be illuminated. Meaning, we don't see what causes the awareness. Like all around us, we think we see light. All around us is light. The world is lit up. Is this the last verse? I didn't get to the last verse. I thought that was like the last verse. Oh, whatever. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Let's just get this light. Shall we see light? It's not a hard enough concept, so why should we rush past it, right? Verse 9. Leave it at that. In light we see light. So we do not. It's a similar thing to what I've been talking about, but let's just make sure we nail it down just slightly, and then we'll wrap this up quickly. Everything you see that illuminates in the world, we have light, and it shows the nature of things, right? I mean, I'm like, oh, I see this big marker. I see what it is, right? The light reveals the nature of things in the world, and I see them, right? But what it's suggesting is also that, on some level, we don't see things. We don't see the actual nature of what things are. And even scientists have talked about this kind of phenomenon, meaning that our brains show us reality, but not as it genuinely is. You know what I mean? But as that there's a subjective distortion that goes on in the human mind of what is seen in the world. And what we observe, I mean, even down to when we're making our observations, that the human mind is interfering with what is really before us. I mean, everything is getting filtered through our minds. That's what I've talked about, many times. It's like, because it's a problem with science that a lot of people don't talk much about. The fact that the observers are all humans. We're also subjects of reality. I mean, we are part of the world. You know what I mean? We are not true observers of it. We are participants in it. And we don't often see, like, it's interesting also, it's like, we don't really see light. We see the thing illuminated. You know what I mean? Like, I have a light bulb up there, but the light bulb is illuminated and giving out light. But as the light comes out, like in the air, as it passes, I don't actually see it between here and there, which is interesting. I don't know if that's what he's talking about. But there is the aspect to which the world, there's hidden aspects of the world. The true nature of things is not revealed to us. But in the light that God gives a secondary light that allows us to see light, like what is truly, allows us to see the things that are hidden in light, as opposed to as they are seen in darkness, meaning through the darkness of the human experience and our ignorant, we see but we don't see, we perceive but we don't understand. And God's light allows us to perceive and understand, to see and see. That's the idea. I think that's the basic idea. I don't feel like I maybe hit that exactly on the head as much as I would have liked to. Like living, like with the life, the two kinds of life, I think very much so I got about as good as I wanted to. But the light and the light, not as much, but just it's kind of a similar concept. Whereas we have light as like a pool, like as something that's static and that we don't, we see this and that and the other and the objects and the shapes of them, but we don't perceive into them necessarily. Like I see this shape, but there's something more to say that it's a marker and to say what its purpose is, right? And there's an even deeper level where you could get down to the molecular structure. There's an even deeper level where you could get down to the thought process that goes behind making such a thing, or the purpose for which it exists. Why did I buy this particular marker at some point in the past? It was a long time ago, actually. But why was it? Why was that obtained? And there's all kinds more that can be known about things that reveal more about their nature. Things about their nature that you may not, necessarily think about. Like when I talked about the bloodstained Bible that I had, there's one, it's just a book with bloodstains on it, but then there's other, it belonged to a particular person and it's their blood, and there's the story of they took it off to war and all that, and it came back. The thing has more to it. The light of God in the things of God reveals more of what God has in store. And through the light of God, we can see the true light of the world. When God inspired, that's another thing. It's like Jesus is the light of the world. To see the light, God has to give us light. To see the light that's been given, we have to be given another light from another source, from outside the world. Anyways, so let's just wrap that up. We'll pick it up with the next verse tomorrow. Thanks for joining me this day. I look forward to being back tomorrow. Until then, have a nice week. We're going to start it off well.
My soul fainteth for thy salvation, but I hope in thy word. Mine eyes fail for thy word, saying, when wilt thou comfort me? For I am become like a wineskin in the smoke, yet I do not forget thy statutes. How many are the days of thy servant? When wilt thou execute judgment on